Hello and welcome to the Cannabis Control Board's employee training. This course is designed to satisfy the requirements of CCB Rule 2.2.5b, a required training for new employees as well as an annual refresher. It also satisfies 2.2.5c, the required training for retail employees before they can serve customers. Be sure to follow the instructions at the end of this training to complete the quiz so you get credit for taking the course. You'll need to watch the entire video in order to be successful in the quiz. Quiz instructions will be given at the end of this course. This training is divided into 4 main sections, as seen here. In Part 1, we will give a quick and basic overview of cannabis policy in the U.S. and Vermont, as well as introduce the Cannabis Control Board and our mission. The United States has come a long way from the war on drugs era approach to cannabis, which increased criminal penalties for many drugs, including what the federal government calls marijuana. Throughout this course, we'll refer to this plant as cannabis. The journey to legalization starts back in the 1970s, with some reduction in criminal penalties. Then, in 1996, California became the first state to permit cannabis for medicinal purposes. Then in 2012, Colorado and Washington paved the way for adult use cannabis marketplace by legalizing it through ballot initiatives. Today, cannabis remains a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act, along with drugs such as heroin, ecstasy, and LSD. You may have heard about a proposal from May of 2024 to move cannabis to Schedule III. That proposal came from the previous administration's Department of Justice. Since then, the effort has largely stalled. The DEA still needs to gather information and get through public comment process to make a determination. Until then, cannabis remains a Schedule I substance. This map shows the current legal status of cannabis across the United States. There are 23 states that have legalized cannabis for adults over 21, including most of New England, with the exception of New Hampshire. So how is it that cannabis can be sold in certain states if it remains federally illegal? That is due to what's often referred to as the Cole Memo, or memorandum. Essentially, it was a legal opinion issued by the federal government saying that as long as cannabis businesses followed state law and don't pose certain risks, such as selling to minors or funding criminal enterprises, the federal government would not prioritize enforcement against them. Here in Vermont, medical cannabis was legalized back in 2004, with the first medical dispensaries being authorized in 2011. Some decriminalization followed, and in 2017, a Marijuana Advisory Commission studied the subject of commercial cannabis. Homegrown in some possession was legalized through the legislature, the first U.S. state to legalize some amounts of cannabis that way. Finally, Act 164 created the adult use cannabis marketplace and established the Cannabis Control Board, with the first legal sale taking place in 2022. The CCB is a 3-member independent executive branch agency created for the purpose of safely, equitably, and effectively implementing and administering the laws and rules of adult and medical use cannabis in Vermont. The CCB currently employs 25 people across 4 divisions. The first few years of the Vermont cannabis market have been busy. Between the creation of the CCB in 2020 and the first legal sale in 2022, the board's work was in establishing its rules and hiring staff. The agency also had to integrate the medical cannabis program, which had been previously housed at the Department of Public Safety. 2022 saw the first adult use licenses being issued. Then in October of 2022, retailers were permitted to begin sales. Since then, some license types or tiers have been closed or temporarily paused. Most recently, the CCB signed a lease to establish our own quality control laboratory, which will soon be fully staffed and operational. The number of issued licenses is constantly shifting, but in mid-July, this is how the numbers broke down. We have over 600 licenses, with just over 400 cultivators and over 100 retailers. There are roughly 90 manufacturers and only a small handful of wholesalers and propagators and 2 licensed laboratories. The CCB and the work we do is governed by state statute and adopted regulations. So how do you find those? We have a page on the CCB website for that. The Laws, Rules, and Regulation page puts everything in one place. At the top are all the legislative acts that created the state statutes, including the law that created the CCB in 2020. The page also links to the latest CCB rules, which were updated in 2025. This training will cover just some of the regulations. More on that in Part 4. Further down on this page, we have the relevant state laws for cannabis. All licensees and employees of cannabis establishments should become familiar with the information on this page. Next, we will go over some of the license types available from the Cannabis Control Board. Cultivator licensees may grow cannabis plants, either outdoors, indoors, or a mix of both. Cultivators may also dry cannabis, package it, create pre-rolls out of flower and/or trim, and sell it to other establishments. They may produce clones for sale to other licensees, including retail establishments. Cultivators may transfer cannabis to licensed product manufacturers to process into cannabis products and repossess their manufactured cannabis product to sell to other licensees. Wholesaler licensees may purchase cannabis and cannabis products from other licensees and sell them to licensees. Think of them as something like a distributor, but they also may package cannabis and cannabis products and may create pre-rolls out of flower and/or trim. Testing laboratory licensees test cannabis and cannabis products obtained from a licensed cannabis establishment, dispensary, or a member of the public. Manufacturer licensees may create products from cannabis plants, including edibles, oils, tinctures, and other such products. There are tiers of manufacturing licensees, depending on the types of extraction methods used. Manufacturers can package their products and sell them to other cannabis establishments. They may not sell to the general public. Retailer licensees may purchase cannabis and cannabis products from other licensees, and they may package and sell cannabis and cannabis products to the general public. Only retail licensees and the retail portion of integrated licensees may sell to the general public. Medical use endorsed retailers may sell medical cannabis and medical cannabis products to qualified patients and caregivers. Propagators may grow vegetative canopy only for the purposes of producing cannabis seeds and clones. Propagators may sell seeds to the general public, but may only sell clones to other licensees. Integrated licensees may engage in the activities of each of the license types. However, these licensees are only available to an applicant and its affiliates that held a medical cannabis program dispensary registration on April 1st, 2022. These were the previous medical cannabis program licenses that were grandfathered into the CCB's program. That covers Part 1. Next, we will cover a basic overview of a few general workplace topics. Part 1 explained that cannabis has a unique legal status, but cannabis establishments are, in many ways, just like any other business. They register with the Vermont Secretary of State, they may have employees, and are required to pay taxes. And like any other business, there are key subjects that every employee should understand. Generally, it is the responsibility of the employer to train their staff based on the rules that apply to their specific business, which can vary depending on size. That said, CCB staff would like to take a few minutes to outline some important areas all employees should be aware of. The first subject is human trafficking. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery, and it takes place everywhere, including Vermont. For those of you who will be customer-facing, this is important to know because both traffickers and victims may use stores. On the CCB website, we have a page that includes many of the resources that are linked in today's training. One of the resources is this Human Trafficking Awareness Guide, published by the Department of Homeland Security. Please use this resource to learn about recognizing the signs of human trafficking. Another topic that every workplace should understand is diversity. Vermont has been a leader of positive change in this area for decades. It was the first state to legalize gay marriage through its legislature. It established a cabinet-level position focused on racial equity in 2019, and acknowledged racism as a public health emergency in 2021. This page, published by the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's Think Vermont campaign, has a ton of resources that cover many facets of diversity. Diversity discussions should also acknowledge the impact of racism. Racism has affected those involved with cannabis for decades. This report from the ACLU, which we've shared on our website, is lengthy but very informative. It shows clear data that the criminalization of cannabis and the war on drugs has been a misinformed and racist government campaign that continues to result in the criminalization of millions of Americans, disproportionately in the Black community. The CCB has recognized this disproportionate impact from the start of our agency. Accordingly, it introduced a social equity program as a tenet of the licensing system. In a 2021 vision statement, the board stated that it aspires to build an equitable and accessible program in order to mitigate the past harm inflicted by the prohibition of cannabis. This includes certain fee waivers and business support. More information can be found on the social equity page of the CCB website. Sexual harassment. All workers are protected under certain laws, depending on the size of the company. Small companies are covered under the Vermont Fair Employment Practices Act, while companies with over 15 employees are covered under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. We have included a link to a state resource called Workplaces for All. On this page are details about relevant harassment prevention laws and a definition of what workplace sexual harassment is. Briefly, workplace sexual harassment is defined in Vermont's law as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature constitute harassment when submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of an individual's employment. Submission to or rejection of such conduct by an individual is used as the basis for employment decisions affecting such individual, or such conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment. We have also linked to a model sexual harassment policy developed by the Vermont Department of Labor. This could be a good starting point for small businesses or those just getting started. When is someone hired an employee or an independent contractor? According to the Vermont Department of Labor, most labor and tax laws assume anyone compensated for work is an employee unless the employer can demonstrate otherwise, or there is a specific exemption in the law. Some employers may choose to purposefully misclassify someone they hire as an independent contractor, when in fact they should be an employee. Often this practice is done to avoid unemployment insurance or other payroll taxes. If you are an employee who believes you have been misclassified, please contact the Vermont Department of Labor. Their website is labor.vermont.gov. It has resources about misclassification and also has a complaint form. This is a 3-part test used by the Vermont Department of Labor to determine when a person hired is correctly considered an independent contractor. All 3 criteria must be met. A. An individual is performing work free from control or direction over the performance. Examples of this include the individual bids for the job and is paid by the job, or the individual completes job with no direction, supervision, or set hours. B. An individual performs a service which is either outside the usual course of business or performed outside all places of business. Examples of this include the individual does work which no other employees do, or the individual does all work at their own facility. C. Such individual is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, profession, or business. Examples of this include the individual has employees of their own, the individual has an unemployment insurance account with the Vermont Department of Labor, and the individual advertises their business services to the general public. Once again, please refer to the Vermont Department of Labor's website for a lot more on this subject. That concludes our brief overview of general workplace topics. Just a reminder This is not meant to be a comprehensive review of these topics, but a starting point to highlight the subjects every employer should be sure to cover with their team. Next, we'll discuss cannabis, cannabis products, and health effects. Since this training is meant for employees of cannabis businesses, we're assuming that most of you have an above average understanding of the cannabis plant, so we won't spend any time on the basics. But when it comes to the health effects of cannabis, there are a few things you should know. Yes, there are valid indications of cannabis for some medical conditions, hence the medical cannabis program. For retail employees interested in obtaining a medical endorsement, please be aware that there will be a dedicated training to cover medical uses of cannabis at a later date. Stay tuned for that. Some of you may be familiar with NORML. NORML is an organization that has been at the forefront of cannabis reform for decades. But as much as they advocate an end to prohibition, they also argue for responsible use with the following principles. 1. Adults only. Cannabis consumption is for adults only. It is irresponsible to provide cannabis to children. 2. No driving. The responsible cannabis consumer does not operate a motor vehicle or other dangerous machinery while impaired by cannabis, nor, like other responsible citizens, while impaired by any other substance or condition, including some medicines and fatigue. 3. Set and setting. The responsible cannabis user will carefully consider his or her set and setting, regulate use accordingly. 4. Resist abuse. Use of cannabis to the extent that it impairs health, personal development, or achievement is abuse, to be resisted by responsible cannabis users. And 5. Respect rights of others. The responsible cannabis user does not violate the rights of others, observes accepted standards of courtesy and public propriety, and respects the preferences of those who wish to avoid cannabis entirely. According to the Centers for Disease Control, there are health risks associated with cannabis regardless of how it is used. Cannabis use disorder. There is evidence suggesting the use of highly concentrated THC products is associated with more severe cannabis use disorder symptoms. Signs and symptoms of cannabis use disorder include trying but failing to quit using cannabis or giving up important activities with friends and family in favor of using cannabis. Risk is stronger for those who start using cannabis during youth or adolescence and who use cannabis more frequently. Brain health specifically affects the parts of the brain responsible for memory, learning, attention, decision making, coordination, emotions, and reaction time. Heart health. Cannabis can make the heart beat faster and raise blood pressure immediately after use. It could also lead to increased risk of stroke, heart disease, and other vascular diseases. With driving, it slows reaction time, it impairs coordination, and can distort perception. And finally, lung health. Smoked cannabis can harm lung tissues and cause scarring and damage to blood vessels. Cannabis and mental health. Cannabis use can cause disorientation and sometimes unpleasant thoughts or feelings of anxiety and paranoia. Cannabis use has been linked to social anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia, but scientists don't yet fully understand the relationships between these mental health disorders and cannabis use. Each cannabis product in Vermont, as well as each cannabis advertisement, must contain this mandatory health warning. Cannabis has not been analyzed or approved by the Food and Drug Administration for use by individuals 21 of age or older or registered qualifying patients only. Keep this product away from children and pets. Do not use if pregnant or breastfeeding. Possession or use of cannabis may carry significant legal penalties in some jurisdictions and under federal law. It may not be transported outside of the state of Vermont. The effects of edible cannabis may be delayed by 2 hours or more. Cannabis may be habit forming and can impair concentration, coordination, and judgment. Persons 25 years and younger may be more likely to experience harm to the developing brain. It is against the law to drive or operate machinery when under the influence of this product. National Poison Control Center's 800 number follows. Additional warning images include these symbols, which should be on every package, as well as the phrase, "Keep away from children." At retail, This mandatory flyer should be printed and made available to every customer. That concludes part 3. Next, we'll take a deep dive into CCB regulations. The Cannabis Control Board is governed by 4 rules as well as state statutes. We encourage every person active in this marketplace to become familiar with these regulations, which you can find on the CCB website. All 4 of the CCB rules have been recently amended and add up to exactly 100 pages. In this section of the training, we will highlight several important parts of these rules. With so much to cover in both regulations and statutes, the CCB uses many guidance documents to explain certain subjects. Licensees and employees should become familiar with these. They are organized alphabetically by subject and include the published date. If you have any trouble finding something that you're looking for, feel free to reach out to CCB staff. Rule 2.2.20 says that all persons working at a cannabis establishment must have an identification card issued by the board, and that any person working at a cannabis establishment must have their identification card in their possession at all times while working at the cannabis establishment. Inspections and records. Rule 2.2.14 says that cannabis establishments shall submit to inspections of their physical site of operations and their records upon request of the board or board designee. Inspections may include uncompensated retention of product samples for laboratory analysis. Inspections will most likely be conducted by a field agent from the CCB's Compliance and Enforcement Division. Their authority is outlined in detail in CCB Rule 4. In general, licensees and employees should know that Rule 4.3.1 says that licensees and cannabis establishment identification card holders, in other words, employees, shall cooperate with investigations, which includes immediate access to facilities and records upon request. To be more specific about what we mean by records, here is a list from Rule 2.2.1 about what should be made available during inspections. Employee list. Information related to facility security. More on security later. Advertising records, if applicable. Inventory records. More on this later as well. Insurance records. Visitor log. Tax records. Waste log. Surveillance logs. Testing records, including all certificates of analysis. Sampling unit records. Standard operating procedures manuals. Contracts and other third-party or outsourced service agreements such as staffing, HR, bookkeeping, purchasing, or inventory management, and pesticide log. General security. Security requirements vary based on the license type. Rule 2 has detailed security requirements for each license type, so it is important for licensees and employees to review that rule carefully to understand how to stay in compliance. Everyone working in a cannabis establishment should be aware of the requirements for reporting thefts. Any theft must be reported to the board as soon as it is discovered. This is done through the inventory tracking forms. If the value of the theft is more than $1,000, it must also be reported to state or local law enforcement. Of course, businesses may choose to report any theft regardless of value to law enforcement if they believe it is appropriate. Many of the security measures, like video surveillance, apply across license types. Here are the CCB standards for video surveillance from Rule 2.4.2c. Retain the footage for a minimum of 30 days. Include date and time stamps on images without significantly obscuring the images. Be capable of producing usable images in the lighting conditions in which it is placed. Be placed in a way that allows for the clear and certain identification of any persons or activities at or in the immediate vicinity of any cannabis or cannabis product, provided that video recordings may be motion activated, and be exportable and transferable to standard computing equipment and have a resolution of 720 pixels or greater, or the equivalent of such resolution. General indoor security requirements. All perimeter doors should be locked. Only those with valid ID cards should have keys or key equivalent. Security alarms are required on all perimeter doors and windows, except that Tier 1 cultivators are exempt unless the board specifically requires it, which may happen on a case-by-case basis. Indoor propagation cultivators will use the same indoor requirements as Tiers 2 to 5 cultivators. Video surveillance must be continuously monitored at any area where cannabis is present, whether it is being grown, harvested, dried, cured, stored, or produced into cannabis products. Outdoor security standards. These requirements were updated in 2025 to offer more flexibility. CCB Rule 2.4.1 lists the following as outdoor security practices: fencing, video surveillance with an unobstructed view of area, alarm system, motion activated floodlight, which can face away from plant canopy, security services, controlled point of access. The minimum security standards that apply will depend on your tier. Tier 1 outdoor cultivators are required to use at least one approved security method of the list. Tier 2 must use at least 2, and so on. Propagation cultivators operating outdoors must have at least 2 methods in place. Licensees are always welcome to use more than the required minimum measures. We have also published a recently updated outdoor security guidance document. Check our guidance library to learn more. Retail security. Cannabis retail stores are the only direct point of contact between the public and Vermont's regulated cannabis marketplace, except that propagation cultivators may sell seeds to the public. As such, retailers must follow more robust security standards than other license types. Retailers are required to meet all indoor requirements that we covered earlier, with one key difference. Retailers may keep entrance doors unlocked during business hours to allow customer access. Additional security requirements for retail include: alarm systems must be industry standard, commercial grade equipment that is installed by an experienced alarm installation company. Access must be restricted to places where cannabis or cannabis products are stored. All employees should wear identification badges while on duty. Video surveillance must include all point-of-sale areas, all entrances and exits, ATMs, areas where cannabis or cannabis products are stored. Video footage must be kept for at least 30 days, and devices must be continually recording. All security information and footage should be made available to the CCB upon request. The number of customers in the retail area at any given time may not be more than can easily be monitored by the employees present in the retail area. Compliance officers may require a retail establishment covers and locks outdoor trash receptacles if they are at risk of intrusion. Point of sale systems must report sales in real time to the Inventory Tracking API. However, systems in place prior to the effective date of this rule may be retained until obsolete if capable of reporting data at least every 24 hours. No one under 21 should be admitted to a cannabis establishment. Retail employees or owners should visually observe all visitors and require an acceptable form of ID of anyone reasonably appearing to be 35 years of age or younger. Acceptable form of identification means a photo ID issued by a government, and it must be current or valid. While the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles issues temporary paper IDs without a photo, that department also states that those are not acceptable for age identification purposes and are meant only for driving privileges. Regardless of whether a customer's age is checked by ID at entry, their ID must be checked at purchase. Any customer or visitor unable to present valid ID should not be allowed to conduct a purchase. Retailers may not acquire or store any personal information about visitors beyond what is necessary to complete the transaction, such as verifying age. Collecting additional personal information requires the visitor's clear consent. Every cannabis product sold in Vermont should be produced, packaged, transported, and stored with safe and sanitary handling procedures every step of the way. Many of these procedures are applicable to any business, whether in cannabis or not. This means complying with the Vermont Occupational and Safety and Health Administration rules, the Vermont Department of Health's Manufactured Food Rule, and the Division of Fire Safety. It is the responsibility of cannabis business owners and employees to understand these requirements. Other health and safety requirements are listed in CCB Rule 2.2.4. They include develop recall procedures appropriate to ensure that adulterated or dangerous products can be called back from the point of cultivation or manufacturing through efficient communication with downstream trading partners. Provide regular training on health, safety, and sanitation procedures. Ensure employees follow those procedures. Do not produce any product that contains any meat or meat products. Do not produce any dairy products, and do not produce any products that require time and temperature controls for safety. Immediately report to the board breaches in health, safety, and sanitary procedures that pose a risk to consumer safety. If you're in a home-based business or a business in a building outside the jurisdiction of fire safety, make sure you have in the area of regulated activity at least 2 operating smoke detectors, or a number of operating smoke detectors at least equal in number to operating security cameras, whichever is greater. And finally, exclude pets and animals from all areas used for cannabis processing, manufacturing, and storage. In this section, we'll review CCB Rule 2.2.4, which covers health, safety, and sanitation. We'll focus especially on employee health and hygiene and how to properly sanitize equipment and surfaces. Each cannabis establishment is required to have standard operating procedures that include employee health and hygiene. These procedures should outline how staff report illness, as well as guidelines for hand washing, proper work attire, and the use of personal protective equipment, depending on the employee's role. Cannabis establishments must also have a written policy that addresses employee illness for those showing signs of infectious illness or for those with open and infected wounds on exposed parts of the body from coming into contact with products or product storage areas. Managers should provide ongoing trainings, at least annually, on employee health to foster a culture where safety and illness prevention are a shared responsibility. This is an example of a hand washing poster from the Vermont Department of Health. Visual tools like this make it easier for employees to follow best practices and should be posted in restrooms or near sinks. Cannabis employees shall thoroughly wash their hands with a cleanser and warm water by vigorously rubbing together the surfaces of their lathered hands and arms for at least 20 seconds and thoroughly rinsing with clean running water, followed by drying of cleaned hands. Employees shall wash their hands in the following instances: immediately before working with open cannabis and clean equipment and utensils, after touching bare human body parts, after using the bathroom, after coughing, sneezing, using a handkerchief or disposable tissue, eating or drinking, after handling soiled equipment or utensils, as often as necessary to prevent cross-contamination when changing tasks, when switching between working with prepackaged cannabis products and open cannabis, before initially donning gloves for working with cannabis. Now we'll review the difference between cleaning and sanitizing and take a closer look at surfaces that do and do not come into contact with cannabis. Surfaces that do not come into contact with cannabis, like shelves, display cases, and tables, should still be cleaned on a regular schedule using approved cleaning solutions. These surfaces do not need to be sanitized. For any equipment or surface that does come into contact with cannabis, both cleaning and sanitizing are required. Cleaning and sanitizing shall be performed as frequently as necessary to maintain all areas, containers, tools, contact surfaces, and equipment in a clean and sanitary condition. Make sure to use sanitizing agent that is registered by the U.S. EPA, and always follow the instructions on the label. Clean tools and equipment should be stored in a clean and dry location where they are not exposed to splash, dust, or other contaminants. Here are 2 common methods of cleaning and sanitizing equipment. First is a typical 3-step sanitizing process. This is often used in food manufacturing and food service establishments. It involves a wash and sanitize step. This is common for utensils and small equipment that can be submerged in water. Use detergent and sanitizers approved for food contact surface and follow label instructions. For equipment that is too large to be sanitized with a typical wash and sanitize step, there is a clean-in-place method. Often, alcohol-based sanitizers are used on equipment that cannot be submerged in water or on equipment used to produce products that are sensitive to water. Each establishment should have a written step-by-step procedure to ensure proper cleaning and sanitizing steps are done correctly. Product registration. Vermont law requires that all cannabis and cannabis products offered for sale to consumers be registered with the board based on compliance with regulatory requirements. Except bulk flower and bulk pre-rolls, retailers may purchase only cannabis and cannabis products that carry active registrations. Retailers have a duty to affirmatively verify product registration status. The responsibility to obtain a registration rests with the licensee that places the product into the final form encountered by the consumer. To accomplish product registration, use forms in the CCB portal. The product labeling and product registration guidance is a great resource for understanding the requirements for products and labels. Please review this guidance document if you are registering cannabis or cannabis products. Cannabis products, such as edibles, tinctures, and concentrates, must be packaged for retail sale in opaque, child-resistant packaging. Cannabis, such as flower, trim, or pre-rolls, is not required to be in child-resistant packaging. Instead, the packaging may be child-deterrent and does not have to be opaque. Medical cannabis and medical cannabis products follow slightly different packaging rules. In addition to certain exceptions, all medical packaging must be black and white only. For more information about medical products, check the product labeling and product registration guidance, as well as in the medical use endorsement guidance. For those of you interested in enhanced medical training requirements, please note that a separate required training on that subject will be available soon. Vermont does not allow retail sales of cannabis or cannabis products in plastic packaging, except for medical products. To explore packaging options that meet the CCB's compliance standards, visit the CCB website. This flowchart, available on the product registration page of the CCB website, walks through the registration process step by step. It explains what is required to being registered, expected times for processing, and clarifies what each status means. Anyone who registers products should review this process in full. Another great resource to understand product registration is our Registered Products Data Portal. This allows for an easy lookup by P number, type, or even keywords like strain name. Inventory tracking. Inventory tracking is covered in CCB Rule 2.2.6. Part of that rule says that all cannabis and cannabis products must be tracked using the inventory tracking system from the time the cannabis is grown by a cultivator until it is sold to a consumer by a retailer. Inventory tracking forms can be accessed in the CCB portal. There are forms for transfers, acquisitions, manufacturers, and loss reporting. The CCB website has demonstration videos that cover several of these forms. For a quick example of how the forms work, here's a demo of an acquisition form from the perspective of a retailer.
Okay, now I'm logged in as a retailer and I'm going to demonstrate an acquisition report from the perspective of a retailer. So I'll click on Create New Inventory Tracking Reports and click on the Acquisition Reporting button. And now you'll see that a transfer reference ID is required to be entered in here. So I've been emailed that transfer ID number. So I'm going to click in the field and you'll see there's a couple that are pre-populated, but I want one that ends in 265 and you'll see it there, but I'm just going to demonstrate if I type in 265 and then click into that field with the cursor, that report shows up. So I'll select that. And once I select it, you'll see the license information. You see the sender, this is the cultivator, and the receiver license. That's the license I'm logged into now. And once I verify that's correct, I hit next. And then after I hit next, the products that were involved in that transfer will populate. And you'll see this update details button. I'm going to need to select that update details button for each item that was entered in the transfer. So I'll select the top one. And once I verify that these are correct, I'll be able to add to attest and submit. But these are all fields that you can edit if there's a discrepancy in what was reported here than what you received on the manifest or what you actually physically received. So if there is a difference, you can report a change here, but you want to make sure that you make the change here and notify the licensee that sent the product to your establishment and make sure they make the change on their end as well. So once you verify that this is correct and you click the attestation button, you'll hit submit. And then once you do that, you'll need to do that on the other product. So I hit the second one. And again, I see the information. There's a harvest slot number or a process slot number, the product registration number, the data transfer, the cost. All these can be edited. And if you need to make a change, you can. But again, you want to notify the sending party that you made a change. And you'll hit submit. And once you've updated details on all the products, I can hit save and next. And this is where I would update a copy of the manifest that I received and signed. Once I upload that, I can hit submit, and the report will be finished. Again, if I did need to make a change after the fact, I can still do that. I can go and hit the correct button, update details on one of the products, make that change, attest, and submit. But again, if you make a change, you'll want to make sure that you update the licensee that sent the product to you. Save and next to submit the report, and you're done with that acquisition.
Employee and buyer samples. Licensed cannabis establishments in Vermont may provide samples of cannabis and cannabis products for employee evaluation or to share with other licensed businesses, in other words, buyers. These samples help with product selection and quality evaluation. There are strict rules about how samples are handled. Who can give and receive samples? Cultivators and manufacturers may provide samples to their own employees or employees of other licensed cannabis businesses. Retailers may accept samples from cultivators or manufacturers and may provide samples to their own employees for product evaluation. You cannot provide samples to customers. How much can be sampled each month? For cultivators, each month a cultivation employee or licensed business can receive up to 4 grams of flower per strain from no more than 7 strains in total. For manufacturers, each month a manufacturing employee or licensed business can receive up to 5 grams of concentrate or extract or cannabis products totaling up to 100 milligrams of THC. Retailers may receive samples within the above limits from cultivators and manufacturers, and they may provide samples to employees following the same quantity rules. Samples must be entered into inventory tracking and labeled appropriately with the warning, product sample, not for resale. Samples cannot be consumed on a licensed premises. That concludes the CCB employee training. Next, you'll need to complete a quiz to make sure that you get the proper credit for taking this course. Follow the QR code shown here or enter the URL into your browser. Once you pass the quiz with a score of 70% or more, you will get credit for the course. If you have any technical difficulties with the quiz, please email the CCB at ccb.info@vermont.gov. Thank you for your time and good luck.